role of leadership in team engagement within a law firm environment. I'm Samantha Seves, and I am one of the membership committee chairs of the BHBA Barrister section. And I'm delighted to introduce today's speakers, Jessica Markham and Kristen Berger. Jessica is an attorney and founder of Markham Law Firm, where she focuses on family law in Maryland and Washington, D.C. She has extensive trial experience and is trained in both collaborative law and guardianship mediation. Jessica is frequently appointed by the court in complex matters, including as best interest attorney, child privilege attorney, and counsel for allegedly disabled adults. She also brings specialized training in business valuation through the National Association of Certified Valuators and Analysts. Kristen is the founder and president of Berger HR Solutions. She draws on over a decade of experience in the financial services industry, including her role as vice president and senior HR business partner at M&T Bank, to deliver strategic HR and organizational development solutions to businesses of all sizes. Kristen specializes in performance management, talent development, and executive coaching, and she has served clients across a wide range of industries from healthcare to tech. And now, let's get started.
Great. Thank you much, Samantha. Really appreciate the introduction. So as Samantha said, I'm Kristen Berger, and I'm the owner and founder of Berger HR Solutions. We provide outsourced HR support to small and mid-sized businesses across the nation, especially here in DC, Maryland, Virginia. The reason for being here today is we actually support over 15 law firms. And one of the things that my team and I have realized over the last several years is that our law firms have really been looking for ways to attract and retain top talent for their teams. Obviously, to make sure that they have the best talent, as Jessica knows, you need to have the best talent to get the most clients, and also just to create a really engaged culture. So with that, I'm going to pull up our slide deck. And I'm very happy to have Jessica join us today. Jessica is a friend and client. And one of the reasons why I wanted her to join us today is because her team really gets employee engagement. They've done a really great job of building a solid culture, engaging their employees. And so I wanted to share, yes, the content around the role that you have in driving employee engagement, but wanted to have Jessica present as well to really give you some real world examples of how can be at play at your firm.
We can see the slides on the side. Do you want to?
One second. There we go.
Yay. See, this is why I don't touch the slides.
All right. So first, just wanted to talk to you about what is a leader's role in employee engagement. It's first to understand the importance of employee engagement, which hopefully you'll fully understand after today's session. 2, wanting to do your part. And I assume for those of you that are on this call, it's because you do want to do your part in driving the employee engagement of your team. 3 is assess engagement levels with your team. 4, identifying key drivers or contributors to employee engagement within your firm. 5, finding engageable moments. And finally, 6, taking action. I'm a big believer that action is where the magic happens. It's great to learn about concepts like employee engagement, but it's even more important to take action. So Jessica and I are going to be helping you with all of these elements today. And specifically, we're going to give you some things that you can do back at your firm to really take action to drive employee engagement.
And I'll just add one thing. I'm just going to chime in because I'm not the HR expert, but I've owned my firm for almost 10 years. I have 10 attorneys and 20 staff in total. So hopefully my experience of running a firm and implementing all these tools can help you, and I'll chime in when I can.
And I can share, because she won't share this with you, that Jessica's firm is highly engaged, one of the most engaged firms, if not the most engaged law firm that we work with. So again, she has lots of great best practices to share. So quickly, what is employee engagement? Many of you may already know something about employee engagement, but just in case, here's a definition. So employee engagement is not employee satisfaction. It's not employee happiness. And I find sometimes that comes as a surprise to leaders. They're like, well, isn't engagement about keeping my people happy or satisfied? And that's not to say we don't want employees to be satisfied or happy, but employee engagement really is more than that. So, employee engagement is the emotional commitment that the employee has to the firm and its mission. It's really wanting to go above and beyond to service the firm, coworkers, clients. I always joke that why I say employee happiness and employee satisfaction don't necessarily equal employee engagement, because I think we probably all know at least one or two EORs within a firm that we've worked with that might not have necessarily been the happiest attorney or staff member, but is still someone that you would consider fully engaged. So that's why I try not to mix the two. Yes, we want people to be satisfied and happy, but we also want them to have that level of commitment and to really feel as though they're a part of the firm and to be bought in.
I think likewise, we also know lawyers that maybe aren't that happy being lawyers and maybe don't want to be lawyers anymore, but that doesn't mean they're not engaged.
Exactly. I mean, some of the most engaged employees I know are not necessarily the most happy or satisfied, but they're very committed to the organization and to their clients. So another thing is a business case. So, I'm guessing if you're here on this call that you understand the importance of employee engagement, but maybe there's others at your firm that do not or really want to have a business case as to why employee engagement is important. And this is really the case. It's engaged employees lead to higher service, quality, and productivity. Obviously, those that are committed to the organization and its goals are going to strive for great service, high levels of productivity. I think we all know that that leads to higher client satisfaction. Clients working with engaged employees are more likely to be satisfied and then refer friends, family, fellow business owners, depending on what your audience is, to the firm, which obviously leads to increased sales, which drives higher levels of profit, which then comes back to hopefully help not just the firm. Yes, more profit helps the firm, but also gives the firm opportunities to do things for its employees. So provide bonus opportunities, higher comp, developmental opportunities, you name it. So, I think it's really important to understand employee engagement isn't just something that's nice to do. It's something that really drives engaged businesses. And I actually saw this firsthand. So I've been consulting for a decade. The decade before that, as you heard, I worked in the financial services industry. We had 100 branches that we surveyed their employee engagement once a year and looked at those numbers. And their employee engagement scores were a leading indicator of branch performance. So if I saw a branch that had high levels of employee engagement, typically they were already high performing or would start trending towards being a high performing branch. And in the reverse, if I saw numbers start to go down on the employee engagement side, often I would start to see the performance of that branch fall. So it was a great way for us as a management team to really look at not just performance, but again, what's driving that performance in terms of employee engagement. And seeing that direct correlation was really eye-opening in terms of all of our best branches also had very high employee engagement numbers. So let's talk a little bit about what the employees look like in terms of the different areas of engagement. And I think, I'd encourage you to think about members at your firm who might fall into each one of these categories. So first you have engaged employees. Engaged employees tend to be those superstars, top people. They're engaged employees who work with passion, feel a profound connection to the firm, really drive innovation, move the business forward. They're the teammates who really think like a business owner, make really good, solid decisions for the firm, really try to build those strong relationships with clients. I mean, I think we would all love to have every single member of our team be an engaged employee. In the middle, you have not engaged. So not disengaged, but not engaged. So the not engaged employees are those people who are essentially checked out. They're kind of sleepwalking through the workday. They're putting in their time, but they're not necessarily energetic or have any level of passion about what they do. They're clock watchers, essentially. It's the people who come in right at 9 a.m. start time, leave exactly at 5 p.m., do only what's asked of them, nothing more, maybe a little less. And aren't really all that committed to the firm, to clients, or essentially collecting a paycheck. So these aren't necessarily bad employees, but they're not employees that are living up to their full potential, and really being an engaged member of the team. And then the last bucket is your actively disengaged employees. And I'm sure all of us can think of, whether your current firm or a past firm can think of someone who is actively disengaged. Those are the people who they're not just unhappy at work or checked out. They tend to be busy acting out their unhappiness. So they're really those people who are negative about the firm, negative about clients, aren't bought in, aren't willing to give any level of discretionary effort. And not only are they checked out, but sometimes they can actually impact those not engaged and engaged employees and pulling the mood of the entire firm down. So, as an HR professional, I look at handling each of these buckets in a slightly different way. Engaged employees are the ones you want to actively support and develop. Not engaged employees are the ones that you want to coach, help them understand the importance of their role. Actively disengaged employees tend to be the team members that are probably going to leave the firm and or be coached out. And so they're the ones that are probably under an active performance plan, or if they're not, they maybe should be. And so you see all of what's interesting is, you can have a combination of all three of these types of team members within your firm. And you really have to think about how you manage each of those groups individually.
I'll just add a little bit about the first two. I think one of my favorite ways of sort of seeing who's engaged is when I put on the Slack, I say, I have a new client coming in and it's a such and such sort of case, and seeing who is interested in it. I mean, are people sort of taking joy in their work? Are they excited to learn? Do they want to take new cases? Last year, I had somebody who I would say was in the not engaged category and was sort of on the cusp of being pipped. And one thing I always noticed was that, yeah, she would take a case, but she didn't seem to really derive any excitement or joy in like learning a new issue or taking a case or having a new opportunity. So it's really exciting to me as a manager and firm owner when I have multiple people saying, ooh, that sounds really, really cool. Can I do that one?
Yeah, and I think one of the trends I see, the third category being actively disengaged, is some of our firms, for a myriad of reasons, will hold on to actively disengaged employees too long. Maybe it's someone who's been with the firm for a long time and they don't want to move on, or they don't have time to deal with the person that actively is disengaged. And, to Jessica's point, having engaged employees is amazing. Having employees that are not engaged, they need some work, but you can get them there. The actively disengaged, I find the longer you let them sit within your team, the more they start to bring down your not engaged and engaged people down with them. And so one of the things I would highly encourage you to do at your firms is, if you do have those actively disengaged employees, make sure that you're taking action, that you're coaching them up or out of the firm so that they don't have a negative impact on the rest of the team. All right, so the next slide is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I think many of us probably saw this high school, college, and are familiar with it. I think it's a really great visual to think about when thinking about employee engagement. So, the base of the Maslow's hierarchy is security and survival. And I find that team members that are stuck in the base of this triangle, are those ones that are really kind of struggling. They might not feel supported at the firm. They're unsure of how they fit in at the firm. Maybe the firm isn't meeting their needs in terms of the kind of work that they want to do, or their compensation, whatever it may be. It's individuals who don't really feel safe and secure at the firm for a number of reasons. And again, that's where a lot of the disengaged employees tend to sit. So they're really not, it's hard to buy into a firm and be motivated if you're stuck in that safety and security mode. And so our job as leaders within law firms is to really help people move out of that bottom of the triangle to make sure that they do feel safe and secure. And again, that can look different with different people. So it might be, if someone doesn't feel safe and secure because of their compensation, it might be either bringing them up to market level, or helping them understand that your firm is not going to be able to get them to the compensation level that they're looking for. And maybe they need to move to a different firm to accomplish that goal. It could also be another way I see people stuck in the bottom is new associates. Sometimes new attorneys come in, they're nervous, they're anxious, they might be intimidated by partners at the firm. They don't really feel safe and secure. So our job as leaders is to provide that reassurance, make sure that they feel safe and supported within the firm and know that they are valued. There's also things that are really kind of fall outside of individuals. So, what we've seen in the last couple years is just world events that have kept people from feeling safe and secure. So obviously we had the pandemic. That made a lot of people concerned about what's the future of my firm, what's the future of my job. I know many of you are in the LA area and dealt with the fires in LA, which obviously led to a lot of issues around safety and security. Is my family safe? Is my home safe? Is my job secure? To a number of other things happening within our political and economic climate. And I think, our job, obviously, we can't control those things as leaders within a firm. But I find in those areas, it's all about providing employees with support and also communicating with them around what things that are going on outside of the firm might be impacting the firm, and giving a clear communication, around this is what it means for our firm. This is what it's going to look like. Here's what you can expect, so that you can take away some of that stress and anxiety that people might be having. Because I think we all know if people are under stress, if they're anxious, if they're going through struggles in their personal lives, it makes it really hard to show up and be engaged at work. Jessica?
Yeah, I just want to add, and we'll speak a little bit more about this later, but I think one thing that lawyers are sometimes quite bad at, is like, if you see here in the not engaged, or let's see. Oh, you don't understand. I lost it, but you don't understand what's expected of you. I think that's one thing that sometimes lawyers are quite bad at, maybe not having a sufficient enough review process, or being not ideal with respect to giving feedback. And that can lead to, falling lower on this hierarchy when somebody doesn't know, they don't even know if they're doing a good job or not.
Absolutely. I think we see that a lot with our law firms, both attorneys and staff that come from other firms. And I think there's that expectation of like, well, they should know what's expected. They should know what to do. But I think we have to remind ourselves every firm is different. So just because someone has prior law firm experience doesn't mean that they know your expectations, your firm's expectations, and know how those expectations, like what that looks like carried out within the firm. So yes, to Jessica's point, making them feel like welcomed, and then also to feel secure and that they know what's expected of them and they know what's going to help them perform at the firm. So, our first goal again is to get people up and out of that security and survival mode so that they're not anxious, they're not worried about their job, they're not worried about relationships with others at the firm. Because again, those are more of your demotivators. Once you get people up to that baseline, so between security and belonging, that's really where as leaders we can motivate team members. So, once you get them, that's kind of like that line between belonging and security. Those are those people who are like, not engaged. They're not disengaged, but they're not necessarily engaged. So that's where you have to really turn on those motivating factors. Make sure that they feel like they belong at the firm, that their role, no matter what role they're in, is important to the firm. And then really supporting everyone's development and growth within the firm. Because I think easy to forget, but yes, a lot of people might be there to collect a paycheck, but deep down, I think almost everyone wants to feel like they're growing, they're learning, they're adding value. And, the top of the triangle is really our opportunity as leaders to help them in that process, is to make sure that they feel fulfilled within their job. All right, so now that we've talked, one of the things that I see in security and survival that I would say is a very hot topic within our law firms is psychological safety. So, because she has lived it firsthand, I'm going to have Jessica talk a little bit about what psychological safety is and how we as leaders in a firm can help create an environment of psychological safety.
Okay, thanks. All right, this could be its own CLE, so I'm not going to.
Truly.
And I don't want to read directly from this slide, but I think, generally speaking, the first bullet really captures it. And I think we've all seen, and there are so many studies out right now that talk about psychological safety in the legal profession. There have been studies. I saw an interesting one recently about bullying in the legal profession that talked about, polled how many people had been screamed at work, how many had been called names, made to feel less than, belittled, insulted, things like that. So I do think this is where a lot of our peers suffer. And I had a discussion recently with another firm owner, and we came from environments where I would say we did not feel psychologically safe at all. And so that's the only professional work experience we've ever had. I mean, that's really the only job I had before I started my law firm, was working for somebody that was highly unpredictable, had, a lot of anger. I felt like if I made a mistake, I was going to get screamed at or called names. And so even if you came from an environment like that, which statistically could be, right? Like, it's hard to kind of unlearn ways of doing those things. And even if you're not yelling and screaming, and you're doing significantly better than where you came from, you still can learn ways to sort of provide that psychological safety to your employees, so that they're safe to express their ideas, ask questions. I remember being at a firm, at that firm, and I think I'd been licensed 2 months, and I issued a subpoena, and the name of the entity was like a little bit incorrect. Like, I put Citibank USA instead of Citibank NA, and it got sent back, and they wouldn't honor the subpoena. And I panicked. I completely freaked out, didn't know what to do. And I just figured I was going to get ripped a new one. So, creating that psychological safety for your employees, like normalizing that everybody makes mistakes, I think is really hard for us lawyers. We don't ever want to make mistakes, but obviously we're not robots. We all do. So even just saying out loud to your associates or your admins, we are all going to make mistakes at some point, I think is really important for them to hear. Do you want to skip to the next one? So these are some ways that you can build psychological safety in the workplace. I think promoting a culture where employees feel comfortable. I think that is largely based on your relationship with each employee, at least your direct reports. You should have open, honest conversations and have an actual relationship where you spend time with them. Because if you have a relationship, somebody is going to be more open to admitting if they did make a mistake or sharing an opposing viewpoint. Modeling vulnerability. Everybody here knows that I have therapy on Mondays from 1 to 2. And so I think because I do that, I've had other employees say, you know what, I'm going to get therapy, and like, this is when my therapy appointment is. So obviously you can't take it too far. You don't want to go into the TMI category, but I think willingness to be vulnerable and showing that you also make mistakes, you also get sad, you also have disappointments, can help. We've already talked about mistakes, valuing diverse perspectives. I think this might be one way that some firms struggle, because I see that there's a divide at some firms between attorneys and non-attorneys. So like really working on that to make everyone feel equally respected, even if you have a pecking order in your organization. And recognizing and rewarding contributions. So this is one of my favorites. periodically, one thing we've done in the past is, particularly during COVID, we gave people funny trophies for different things. When we were really struggling to find ways to connect. But one of my favorites is using an app called Bonusly, that integrates with our Slack. People can award each other points. Everybody gets allocated a certain amount of points per month. And then everybody sees when somebody gives somebody else an award, and they can use those points to buy gift cards. And people really enjoy that. You put in what the person did, you put in a funny GIF, you give them a certain amount of points. And it's nice for everybody to see everyone else appreciating one another.
Right. Now, and I love that, Jessica. I think that's something really great that you do as a team. And I've seen, as I look across the law firms that we work with, recognition is something that a lot of our attorneys and legal staff struggle with. I think it's a fast-paced environment, and sometimes it's really easy just to forget to say thank you or recognize accomplishments. It's kind of like, oh, that's just what we do. But I think taking that time to really recognize and reward peers as well as direct reports is so important. I also like that you brought up the different levels. Like, one of the things that we see is the power dynamics. I find even if you are someone who's vulnerable and admits that you make mistakes and kind of create that environment of psychological safety, there's always this natural power dynamic that exists in law firms of, like you said, attorneys and staff, and then junior attorneys to senior attorneys to partners. And so I think it's really important to recognize like where you fit in, and making yourself, especially if you are at a partner level or a senior attorney level, to again make yourself accessible to staff and other attorneys, and show them that they can come to you, they can talk to you, they can admit their mistakes. I can't tell you how many law firms I've seen get into trouble because a legal assistant or an associate attorney makes a mistake and is afraid to go and let their partner know that they've made a mistake. And it's a shame because, those mistakes can actually turn into learning opportunities if they're handled the right way. But you really need to have that safety and security where, like, Jessica, I know any of your junior associates wouldn't be scared at all to come to you and say, Jessica, I made a mistake, please help. And I think that's really what we want. It's like they got to learn from it. But I think it's important that we can admit mistakes. And I find that's something a lot of lawyers and our high level professionals, our accountants, doctors really struggle with is,
Let's switch to the next slide.
So, key contributors. So I think it's really important that you understand what key contributors are leading to each individual at your firm's engagement, but also team engagement. So as I'm talking, I'm going to bring up a ton of different key contributors. And I'm sure as you look at this slide, there are going to be 2 or 3 that stick out to you, either because they're important to you or they're important to your firm. One of the actions that I would suggest taking is taking a slide like this, with all of these different drivers of engagement, and asking members of your team, your coworkers, what are 2 or 3 of these that are most important for your engagement? One, you can then figure out what's important to each individual and then craft, how you interact with that individual around those key drivers. But you might also, and I see quite frequently, there's trends. So certain firms, you may find that the majority of your employees value recognition and appreciation or meaningful work or a culture of diversity, whatever it might be. And then you can really kind of double down, because I know we're all limited for time. You can really focus your actions as a leader around those areas of key engagement. So, Jessica, any that jump out to you or that you find are big drivers for your firm?
I think a lot of them, but one that jumped out was meaningful work. So, finding out we practice family law, but finding out what is meaningful to each person, because some people really like working on the special immigrant juvenile status cases, or they really like working on domestic violence cases. So some people just feel that a certain type of case is more meaningful to them.
Mm-hmm.
And trying to give that person the cases that they're interested in within reason. But we got to move to the next slide.
Yep, that's a great example. And then also, like, another key is really looking for engageable moments. So a lot of times I think we think about more of the formal moments. So, when we're recruiting and onboarding or doing a performance review or giving formal feedback or training. But I think honestly, the better opportunities to really engage people are in those small moments. So, it's the giving them recognition for something that you see them do on the spot, like, hey, you did a really great job with that client, or you really did a great job in court today, and here's what I thought was particularly strong about what you did. Having those quick ways to recognize, as Jessica said, even if sometimes it's in a fun way, like a superlative or a trophy or something to like show people that you're thinking about them. I also think, again, personal crises are another opportunity to really engage staff. I mean, to Jessica's point, I think we all go through things. You may have employees who are struggling with their mental health, they're struggling with things at home, or are dealing with, again, any number of circumstances. And I think, it really gives us an opportunity as leaders to show up and show team members, I see you, I care about you, I want you to feel supported here. Any others that you
Yeah,
focus?
I mean, I think the career development discussions, like finding out people's short-term and long-term goals and being willing to think outside of the box. For example, I've sent a few attorneys to community college because they felt like they didn't have enough financial background for some of our cases, and they did accounting.
Mhm.
And at my old firm, I asked if they would pay for that for me, and they said no. And that really just really stuck with me. I never forgot that they weren't willing to pay like $1,000 for me to take a class. So another one is I always remember somebody here, her father passed away, and we didn't have like any formal proclamation or anything, but and his funeral was like an hour away from the office, and every single person in the office went to his funeral, and she felt really supported, and I thought that was just so, I was so happy to see that like nobody had to pressure anybody, and everybody really showed up for her, and I know she always remembered that. But even, for example, like personal crisis, I remember somebody once fell for like a phishing kind of scheme and wired money, and they came to me, and just as a trusted mentor to help them figure out what to do. And so I was happy that my employee trusted me to help them in a moment of crisis. So but why don't we go on to the next slide?
Absolutely. So this is really kind of where we get into the action portion and some really specific things you can do. Um, the book, it's on this slide, The Truth About Employee Engagement. I would highly, highly recommend that if you're a reader, you get a copy of this book and read it, or listen to the audio version. Or if you're not much of a reader, maybe go and chat GPT and ask for a nice summary of it. It's a really great book. One that the first time I read it, I was like, this really sums up and captures everything that I would want a manager or a leader to know about employee engagement. And basically, the book says that there's three things that lead to job misery: anonymity, irrelevance, and immeasurement. And that those three things can make someone, or especially all combination of all three can make someone really miserable in a job. And, I think if all of us reflect about a job that we maybe didn't enjoy, probably one of these elements existed. And so the great thing about it as leaders is that we can really kind of turn these over on their head and do the inverse to really help drive employee engagement. So, make sure people feel valued, that they know that their job is important, and that they know how success is measured, and that really is kind of the recipe for driving employee engagement. So again, it's A Truth About Employee Engagement by Patrick Lencioni. Great book. Highly recommend you read it if you want to learn more about employee engagement. So we're going to talk about each of those elements and what that can look like within a law firm environment. So first, addressing anonymity. And I am going to read this quote because I think this one, I remember when I read it, really stuck with me. It is far more difficult to decide to leave an organization or team when you feel that others on the team know and understand you as an individual. I think, we can all think of, hopefully it's within your current firm or a past firm where you really felt connected to the team and you really felt valued by the team. So in Jessica's example, where the employee's father passed away and the whole team showed up at the funeral, I am sure that she felt extremely valued and supported in that moment. And, even when times are hard, it's a lot easier to stick it through if you know that you have a good, solid team that has your back. So, how can we influence that as leaders? First, just get to know your employees. So, I think sometimes, especially in busy law firm environments, it's really easy to focus on the work, the work, the work, the work, the work. I think it's really important that we also take time to get to know people on a personal level. One of the biggest things that I tell all of our law firm clients is have some type of regular one-on-one, whether it's short weekly, a longer monthly meeting, a quarterly meeting, have some type of meeting with anyone that's your direct report on a regular cadence. And yes, talk to them about work, but spend the first, 25% of the meeting just getting to know them, asking them, like, how have things been? How's your family? What do you have going on outside of here? Like, make sure that you really get to know them. Because I find, employees they want their direct supervisor to know about them, know about their family. To see them again is more just a cog in the wheel. And then really show a genuine interest in them as individuals. So I know all the best managers I work with know their employees and also show that genuine interest. So, we'll ask about, hey, I know your son had a baseball game over the weekend. How did that go? Or, hey, I know you were taking a new yoga class. Like, what do you think of it? Is it good? Really, like, not just hearing things about them, but remembering it and bringing it up and showing that you have a genuine interest in what they're up to and what they might be doing outside of the firm. And then lastly, like, again, that displaying care and empathy in times of need. If someone's having challenges with their family, challenges outside of work, health challenges, whatever it may be. Yes, there's limits to what we can do as managers or leaders, but to show that care and empathy and be supportive in those times. Because, we all go through hard times, and I think hope that people will show up for us. So, Jessica, talk to me a little bit about what you do at your firm. I know you are probably I can say not even probably the best at showing your employees that you value them and that you care about them. What are some things you do?
So what I will say is it gets harder. I think it's gotten harder for me at like two different points in the growth of the firm. When we were smaller, everybody reported to me, and it was easier when the office even was physically smaller to talk to everybody all the time and know everyone. And then when I got to the point where we were larger and people now have a direct report and not everybody reports directly to me, that becomes hard because, for example, I had a law clerk start last Monday. I'm not going to probably spend that much time with that law clerk, right? So, one thing we do in onboarding is we have an onboarding schedule for every person that starts, and that person meets every single person in the firm. So, for example, my associate Leslie is always in charge of talking about our file storage system and naming conventions. So she gives the same little spiel to every person that starts. Now, of course, we could record that, but like it wouldn't provide the same opportunity for people to get to know each other. So, I spend time with every new hire, and I think one way that I can spend a little extra time with employees, like once a week, I spend half an hour with the three junior associates, and I talk about any topic that they ask me to talk about. So, for example, one was doing pretrial statements. And so I try and encourage them not to be on mute. And it's not just me talking about pretrials, but I say, like, what do you have coming up? What cases do you have to file a pretrial statement in, et cetera, et cetera. So that kind of gives me a little extra time with them. And even, for example, if they're coming to a mediation, even if they're just observing, or if they're second chairing something, I try and drive there together. So we get like an extra 45 minutes in the car. That helps, or, go to lunch or go to breakfast before or after, whatever. And once a year, we all go to the state bar conference and we all stay in the same hotel and we try and do all the activities. And so in between, we just did this, mini golf and going to lunch and things like that, I think really helps, because a lot of times I think the younger employees and newer employees are just intimidated by the older ones.
Yeah.
So things like that really help. And then, throughout the year, we do things. One of our core values is doing work in the community. So we tend to do things that really enable us to spend some quality time together. So making sandwiches for a shelter, or going to a food distribution center for for food distribution, where we're packing and we're like even just doing like sort of physical labor stuff to the extent people can, right? You have to be mindful that everybody can do it, but doing things like that is really nice because again, I'm fortunate everybody here can like help pack a cardboard box. And so I find in those moments, like the receptionist and the senior council can do something together where everybody's sort of on equal footing and everybody's contributing an equal amount. Things like
that. What I love about that is it gives people, and it's kind of a twofold, like it gives people the opportunity to just interact with each other in a more social, casual environment than sitting at the firm, but also in showing people they're valued. I mean, you can pick causes that are important to members of your team to show them like, oh, you focus on mental health, or you're focused on, safety for children, or whatever it might be, and like show them like we value your value so much that we're actually going to spend time in that space. I think is really powerful. So it kind of it hits two things whenever you do activities like that. But thank you so much. So many great examples. And again, some of those things are like they're relatively simple. It's just making the time to do it. Like I love riding together in the car, grabbing coffee together, before or after trial. I think those little moments can really make a big difference. So some of the best practices that, we have for really getting to know team members and making sure that they feel valued, I already mentioned, but the schedule employee one-on-ones. I think one-on-ones are really important. Again, I think they should always be a regular cadence. People often ask me how frequent. I'm like, you should do it in a cadence that makes sense for you and your firm. The biggest thing is that you do them consistently, because I find having one-on-ones, whether it's with peers, with direct reports, and holding true to those one-on-ones shows them that you value them, you want to spend time with them. So I always tell people, don't cancel your one-on-ones all the time. Make sure you're having them. And if you don't have a lot to cover, catch up on a more personal level. Some of the questions I recommend, because I have a lot of clients that want to have an agenda for one-on-ones, is, really asking questions that are personally focused and work focused. So, starting with a simple, how are you? Because you might find that the person is completely stressed. And so your conversation is going to be more focused on overcoming those challenges and dealing with the stress that they're dealing with. You might learn something about them personally. You really kind of can figure out where they are in their headspace before you just dive into the meeting. From there, another question I'll often ask is, what are your biggest challenges or obstacles that you're facing? And again, especially if you're a more senior person, it's like, hey, what are you facing? And let's kind of troubleshoot this together. And so it's a way to not just deal with their challenge, but also for them to grow professionally and figure out, learn how to process through challenges. That's where the how can I help? And how can I support you, your personal and professional goals? I think that last one is a big one. And it's not something that you're necessarily going to ask every one on one. But, it's something I see, Jessica, and your team is you have a lot of young associates who are really looking to grow as attorneys. They want to grow personally, professionally. They have their personal goals, but they also have goals for the firm. And I think showing that you're interested and willing and able to support them with those goals really goes a long way in building that trust and making people feel like the firm is a good fit for them.
Yeah, I think just like in the last month, for example, I always schedule an hour with my direct reports for the one-on-ones. And I tend to hear things like, my husband is getting surgery this month. I mean, things like that, that probably we're all running around and we're in court, and I may not have heard that kind of thing otherwise. And they might say, I'm really stressed this week because of the surgery, or, I've heard like my dog might, need to be put down soon. So like sometimes people share things that give you a little perspective on maybe what's going on with their performance or their stress level, or, they might say like, I don't know that I really want any new cases this week or any new intakes. Um, I know one of my the person that is in charge of the admin staff, she always asks them any new skills they learned that month, or I think she calls it wins and losses. So, I think that's nice. Um, I don't ever want to spend too much time on this, but particularly for people who supervise other people that I might not have that much contact with, I ask them, how do they think that person is doing? Or like, I don't want to spend too much time on it because that's not necessarily the point of the meeting, but I might say, how do you think they're doing? And sometimes they ask me for pointers. Like, for example, they might be a new supervisor and they might say, I'm supervising the new associate, but the new associate like doesn't talk. Like, what do I do? Or I feel like I
Yeah.
don't know her that well, or whenever I ask her how it's going, she gives me one word answers. So sometimes they need to be coached on how to be a good manager. Um, so those things are nice. I will say with the employee one-on-ones, sometimes, and I try and like, you know, be judicious about this. So I'm not like favoring, but sometimes I take somebody to lunch for their one-on-one. Sometimes we do a walking one-on-one, but I always try and make sure that I'm not on my phone. My computer is off, like holding my calls. And, some people just want to get back to billing. So they want to be done with the one-on-one quickly, or they're like, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine. But I try and make it at least go half an hour, because there's always like something of value that we can talk about, even if the person is like stressed and wants to leave. You know what I mean? Even they're like, I'm fine, I'm fine,
Yes.
I'm
Yes.
fine.
There's always something, and I think that's a great point. Again, it's so simple, but it's so impactful. I mean, I have so many employees who will talk to me or my team and say, during my one-on-ones, my manager either always cancels them, or if he does do my one-on-one, he's texting the whole time or answering emails. And like, I want to talk to him, but I just don't really have the guts to like bring it up. And so, I think it's really important as leaders that we create that space. Also, if we're on the receiving side, we're the person, the employee in the one-on-one, that we're also taking advantage of that time and minimizing distraction. So it's like, it's 30 minutes. Let's just put our phones down, our email down, and like focus on one another for these 30 minutes and then move on about our
Right.
day.
I will say one thing that I tend to talk about with the more senior attorneys in our one-on-ones is, what kind of cases do you have right now? Are you getting the cases that you want? Because somebody might say, well, I really want to do more adoption cases. Then we think about like, is the marketing reflective of that? Could they be doing more blog posts? Are there lunches? Sometimes I focus the entire one-on-one on, are there people you should be inviting to lunch? Or is there a CLE that you could be teaching or attending? So you can get really creative in your one-on-ones to see how you can support their goals.
Yeah, no, and I think like with talking about doing CLEs or sometimes people say, well, my senior staff, they don't need to be developed. They're senior, they're seasoned, they're great. So I'm like, sometimes their development goals might be passing on that knowledge. Hey, Leslie, you're an expert. I need you to do a CLE, or I need you to work with these, the younger associates. And because that keeps them engaged and feeling like they're learning and growing. Because yes, they might be an expert on the topic, but it makes you an even more of an expert if you can actually teach it too. So that's sometimes a miss. Sometimes it's like, oh, my senior people don't need development goals. I'm like, everyone needs some
Do
type
you
of
want to, do
development
you
goal.
want to just briefly explain state interviews and we can
Yeah.
move?
So I was going to say, and then I'm going to switch to the next slide. But for stay interviews, one of the trends that I have recognized in my years of HR experience is often we'll find out things in exit interviews that if we had known 6 months earlier, we could have saved a great employee. That they were unhappy with their compensation, or they didn't feel like they had development opportunities, or they were struggling to communicate with their manager. So, one of the things we really emphasize and encourage all of our managers to do, and I would encourage all of you, especially those of you who are supervisors, to do this with your team, is to conduct stay interviews. And so, some of the questions we'll ask during the stay interview are very similar to what we would ask for an exit interview, but while someone's still with the firm. So, like, what do you like about coming to work every day? You could change something about this job or this firm. Again, this takes some vulnerability, but asking them the question, like if you could change something about the job or the firm, what would it be? What motivates you, demotivates you? And if you're really gutsy, and I've asked this to top performers, like, hey, you're a top performer. We want you here long term. What would tempt you to leave? Because I want to make sure I know what that is and I meet your needs before you're applying to other firms and definitely before you're giving me a resignation letter. And so, it's really, you can do it more in like a formal setting in the office. But I find with a lot of these, like when I was internal, I knew the top, 15, 20 managers within my market of the bank. I would sit down with them for coffee or lunch once a year, twice a year, and have these kinds of conversations with them. And it's amazing how much comes out of those conversations, and it allows you to be more proactive than reactive.
Okay,
Because
next slide, next slide. We're
when
running.
someone, yes, I know we've got lots of to get through all. And so the next one is addressing irrelevance. I think this is really important, especially with staff or more junior associates. It's really that, we all need to be needed. We want to know that if we're putting a lot of time and energy into something, that it's important to someone, that we're moving the needle, that we're making a difference. And I always say, like, a good test for if someone's feeling irrelevant is if they say, I'm just. Well, I'm just a legal assistant. I'm just an admin. I'm just a junior attorney. That to me is like a ding, ding, ding. This person's feeling irrelevant. So the questions that I always ask that person when I get that feeling of irrelevance is, who are you helping and how are you helping, and helping them think about, what impact, even the small things that you do each day, how does that then impact the greater good? So, Jessica, I know you have a great example of this and some things you do for your
Yeah, I have a bunch of examples. Well, so one example I will give is I think a lot of people have extremely high turnover with their receptionists. And I think a lot of this is like starts with position descriptions and the interview process and onboarding. But just, I mean, think about the receptionist, whoever's doing intake, or any of the people that are answering the phone. You are the face of the firm. You are the first person that anybody's going to talk to. Somebody is going to potentially choose our firm or not based on every word that comes out of your mouth in the first 10 minutes. This person has had a really hard time making this phone call, and just the difference that person can make. So the way you talk to people about their job is really important. Similar to, for example, a law clerk. So a law clerk could come in here and be like, I don't know anything and I'm just a law clerk. But when I have them do research, for example, they might say, well, here are the cases. And then I'm going to say, well, I haven't read the cases. You're reading the cases. So you tell me what you think. I mean, you give me the answer. You're the one with the answer. So tell me, is the client, we had one the other day, and I said, is the client going to get their dog if they litigate it, or is their spouse going to get their dog? And so I think, telling the law clerk, you're the one with the answer and you tell me who's going to win the dog, then people start to feel like, okay, my job is important because I'm making a meaningful contribution. But one thing that I found over the years is it's really helpful if the clients meet the legal assistant, even if it's at the very, the one assigned to the case or the paralegal, even if it's at the very end of the consult, because then they see each other or they know each other and they have, there's more significance to the legal assistant as opposed to just being, I'm printing out exhibits for, I don't know.
Yeah. It's a person, it's not paperwork anymore.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I'm helping this person
Yeah.
in
Same with
something that's
associates.
very
They
important
they
to
meet
them.
the client,
Yeah.
meeting the client when there's a client. So let's do you want to jump
I
to
love it. And then empowering employees. I mean, to your point, Jessica, like empowering people to make decisions, to give their input. Like, you own the relationship with the client. I trust you and you can have this conversation or you can meet this client. So the last one is addressing immeasurement, which is a word I just hate. But I mean, really the flip of that is,
probably not a word, but we're gonna pretend
right?
it's a word today.
Blame Patrick Lencioni. Love him as an author. Don't love that word. But, you know, this particular statement, great employees do not want their success to depend on the subjective opinion of another human being, I think applies nowhere else stronger than within a law firm environment. I think most people at law firms, do not want their success to be dependent on someone else or subjective measures. I always say it's a lot of people who are A students, A plus students, strivers who are like, I want to do a great job, but they need to know what that great job looks like. So, similar, I know from a lot of lawyers I talk to in law school, it kills people to not know, like your first semester, not to know how you're doing or get your final grades till the end. There's not a lot of feedback. And that's really hard for people. And I think it's the same in the workplace. It's really important that one, your team knows what the expectations are. So they have kind of that rubric for success. So, okay, well, if I meet these expectations, I can be confident that I'm being successful, but also that they get feedback along the way on how they're meeting or falling short of expectations so that there's no surprises. No one wants to be surprised by hearing you're failing. They want to kind of learn in the micro way throughout time. So, a couple things is one, I think it's really, really important. We tell all of our firms you should have very clear objectives for each position at the firm, clearly articulate those to all new employees coming in, but also clearly articulate it on a regular basis to everyone within the firm.
Right.
Some of the key things that when you're doing those is one, identifying an area that an employee can directly influence. Sometimes I'll see firms give an attorney or a staff member or an admin an objective that's something that they really have no control
Oh
over.
yeah. How about a first year associate that's responsible for making sure all their clients are paying? I mean,
Right, exactly. And so
might not
it's like,
even know the client. They haven't picked the client. Yeah.
so it's something that they can directly influence and is actually part of their job. To our last point, make sure that the measurements are connected to the person or people that they're meant to serve. Like, hey, we have the expectation that you do this because it has an impact on the direct client. So for the admin, it might be, we want you to get back to all phone messages within an hour or within a half day. And the reason is because we have clients that are working under tight timelines, might be anxious, and we want to make sure that we get back to them as soon as possible so that people understand the why behind the expectation, not just the expectation itself. And again, clearly communicating it to the employee in a way that's clear and meaningful for them. I mean, so many times people, I'll be like, well, why is that an expectation of your role? And they're like, I don't know. And that's a problem because I find people are more likely to follow through on expectations when they actually understand the why. I think we all know attorneys love to ask why. Well, why? Like, why do I need to do this? Why do I need to follow this process? Why do I need to meet this expectation? And I think it's really important as leaders that we can answer those why questions. And then again, to check in regularly. If you know that someone at the firm is struggling, don't wait until, don't let them underperform for 6 months and then bring it to their attention. That's why one-on-ones are so important. Bring it to their attention right away when it's a little issue so that they can get the feedback and make a correction versus surprising them 6 months down the road when they might think they've been performing and then they find out that they haven't. So again, it's really setting clear expectations, following up on those expectations, providing feedback if people are meeting or not meeting those expectations, and then honestly celebrating success when you do have team members meeting expectations, providing that recognition, the reward, the great job. so that they, again, can feel, okay, I've been doing a good job and I know what I need to do to continue doing a good job.
I'll
So I know
I'll add a
we are
little bit. Yeah, we have
almost
like
at time,
1 minute.
Jessica. And then just so I know many may have to hop directly at the hour. I will stay on. I believe Jessica can stay on for a bit too to answer any questions that anyone may have. But Jessica, last point on
Yeah, I
measures.
was going to say, I think in terms of a measurement, we have our core values on the website on the careers page. We have the core values in our slide deck during onboarding. We have the position descriptions that go into great detail that we have people sign on their first day, just acknowledging these are their responsibilities in great detail. We have everybody's position descriptions available to everyone else, so it's very clear whose job is what. And the core values and are reflected in our review forms. So in the self-assessment and in the manager's assessment, they all tie back to our core values. And so people know that they're being judged with respect to, are they collaborating? Are they, reflecting teamwork? Are they, showing up to our community events? Are they, doing all the things? So it shouldn't be a surprise to anybody. And then for all new employees, we do a 90-day, I can't remember what we call it, but essentially a 90-day review just to be like, this is how we think you're doing, and these are the things that you can improve upon, and so forth and so on. So
I love that. And I think to your point, it starts with like, if you as a firm have solid values, you know what your mission is, you have your core objectives, it's a lot easier then to kind of trickle that down and communicate it to each individual team member.
yeah.
Right. And it gets buy-in. Not only does it help them meet expectations, but it also helps them buy into the firm and what you're looking to do as a firm. So thank you so much, Jessica, for all of your real world examples. It's so helpful. Thank you all to everyone who participated on this call. I hope you took some good things away, and I would encourage you to think through, at least one or two actions that you're going to take back in your office as a result of what you heard today. And again, with that, we will conclude the presentation, but I will stick around for a few minutes if we have any questions.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Alrighty then. Well, it looks like we don't have any questions, so I'll go ahead and close the session. Thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you to our audience.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
You may be eligible for CLE credit in your state. Visit bhba.org/podcasts for more information.